Hey guys, welcome back. This is pretty exciting because this is going to be the first video in a brand new series. And for every video in this series, we're going to be taking a look at a movie or a TV show or even a video game, and we'll take an object from that and build a design around it. And for today's video, we're going to be looking at a little guy who lives in a pineapple under the sea.
Are you a weakling? Built like a sponge? Well, now you too can have muscles.
Huh?
With anchor arms! They slip on like a glove. Just add air. How big do you want them? Normal? Veiny? And for the ladies, hairy. I was a wimp before anchor arms. Now I'm a jerk and everybody loves me. So order now, wimp.
Wow, now that's a good idea.
So yep, today we're going to be doing a design based entirely around anchor arms from the TV show Spongebob SquarePants. In the show, the only thing we ever see is the product itself. They never show any logo or packaging design or anything like that, so I think that's what I'd like to tackle today. So let's just go ahead and get started with the logo. As far as the branding for this goes, I really want to pull the look and feel from the commercial shown in the show. So that means we want it to feel very tough and loud and maybe even obnoxious, and we also want to try to work in some of those color palettes as well. And since this brand is based entirely around muscles, I want to find a pretty thick font to use for our base. Now obviously the most iconic part of this entire brand is those big pink arms. So I think I'm going to grab a quick illustration of an arm, and maybe that'll help us come up with some ideas. So I found this guy right here, and I really like its style. Just like the arms in the TV show, it's got a really human form, and it's super muscular too. And you know, I bet we could actually duplicate this and place it on this other side. And now we've got it set up to where we're showing both of those arms, which I think is nice because the product is obviously going to come with two arms, as it clearly says in the name. But now we just need to find a way to better integrate the illustrations with the text. I think we can start by changing this text from a solid color to an outline to match the arms. And I like the look of the outlines because it really helps us mimic the feel of a cartoon. What if we tried making our text a bit bigger and make it look like it's almost connecting these two arms together? And I think this is kind of clever because now it looks like the word arms actually has arms. And since we do have a literal representation of the word arms, maybe we should have an icon of an anchor in here as well. So I've got this guy right here, and I'm thinking maybe we could put it right in between these two words. And I feel like arms is the primary word in the name, so I'm gonna make anchor a bit smaller. We definitely need a better way to incorporate this anchor icon into the rest of the logo, so I'm wondering if we can make it bigger and put our word anchor across this top bar up here. And I actually really like this because now not only does our word arms have arms, but our word anchor helps make up an anchor. But I still think the size of our words are too different, so I'm gonna make this one bigger. And you know, oddly enough, this arm graphic is pretty similar to the bottom of our anchor. Both have a pretty defined curve shape, and these hands kind of make a point just like the arrows on the anchor do. So in the same way that we replace the top bar of the anchor with the actual word, maybe we could go ahead and replace the bottom of this anchor with our arm graphic. I'm really liking this concept, but we definitely need to find a way to get rid of some of this empty space. And I think one thing we can do is find a font that's not so wide. And with a stroke of luck, I actually found a font that's based on the font used in the SpongeBob show. If you do watch the show, it's probably pretty recognizable to you. You'll see it on like the narration cards. And not only will this help us condense the logo, but it'll also really help us bring in that SpongeBob feel. And because we gave these letters a stroke, you'll notice that some of the strokes are starting to cut off the insides of the other letters. And one thing we can do to remedy that, as well as make our letters a little bit thicker, is make a duplicate of them right over top of the original version, and we'll remove the stroke from the one on the top. And that'll make sure that all the strokes are behind the letters and none of it's cutting into the letters themselves. We can thicken up that backstroke just a bit, because I think that'll help this feel more cartoony. And we can do the exact same thing to the anchor text up here as well. I definitely want this bottom part to be a little more curved than it is right now, so I'm actually going to transfer all of this over into Photoshop so we have a little bit more control. And I think the first thing we can do to develop this curve more is to rotate these arms. And then we can curve our arms text more by warping it. Let's scale up these arms now, push those closer in, and I think I'll add some warp to the anchor text as well. That way it has a slight curve to it. To match the cartoony style of the rest of our graphics, I definitely think we need to reshape the shaft of this anchor. Now this is definitely feeling a lot more like the shape of an anchor, but I do think this jagged outline created by the letters breaks up that shape too much, so maybe we could paint more of a solid outline around our different text objects. And that definitely helps to define the shape better, and it even makes our text more legible. So our text has pretty thick outlines right now, and we definitely need to try to replicate that on the arms. And it's important to note that on the show, anchor arms only had 4 fingers instead of 5. And then I'll just duplicate this to the other side to replace our old arm. And if we take a look back to the original anchor icon we kind of based this around, you can see we have these two little bulbs on the end of this top pole. And I think it'd be cool to add that back in here. I think the last thing we really need to do is clean this up a little bit, and then we'll be done. And here's the changes that I made. Basically, I just condensed some of the text to make it less wide, and I also rotated the arms more just to fill in some of that empty space we had in the original version. I cleaned up the anchor part some, and I also added some overall thickness to most of the lines just to make it feel a bit more beefy. I feel like this version is pretty solid, and it works well in black and white, but now let's go ahead and make a colored version. As far as the color palette goes, I'd like to draw in some of the colors that are used in the original commercial. And the first thing I think we can color are these iconic arms. And as for the rest of this, I'd kind of like to make it look like metal, so I feel like a bluish gray color would work pretty well. And really what I'd like to do is make this look like it matches the style of SpongeBob. And if you've ever watched the show, you'll notice that at least for the backgrounds, there's two main things that make up their style. First is that all the objects have a very hand-painted look. You can see brush strokes and textures and things like that. And the second is that each object's outline is a darker color of the main object, instead of just being black. So let's start out by coloring our outlines here. For the outlines of the arms, we'll make those a darker red. And for the anchor, we'll just make those outlines a darker blue color. To make this feel hand-painted, I'm just gonna use some special brushes, like this charcoal brush that gives us this really gritty texture. We're basically just trying to make this look 3D, so I'm gonna add the standard lighting and shadows in the places you'd expect them to be if the light was coming straight down from above. And for the rest of this, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna try to make this part look really metallic. Usually the outlines stay a solid color, so I'm just gonna leave those alone. So I think what would be cool next is to make some packaging for the actual anchor arm product. So I've got this mock-up of a box, and this is what we're gonna use for the packaging. If you've ever seen SpongeBob, you'll know that any of the products in this show have a fairly simplistic design. So in keeping with the theme of the show, we don't want to overcomplicate this. We just want somebody that sees this to instantly know that it's anchor arms, and it may not hurt to give them some details about the product in case they're not familiar with it. So let's go ahead and bring in our logo, and I imagine that going really large right in the center of the package. And this mock-up is actually really nice because it'll help us add that cardboard texture automatically to everything we put on here. At least in my opinion, the most iconic thing from the Anchor Arm commercial is this line.
Now I'm a jerk and everybody loves me.
So I think we definitely want to put that somewhere on here. Now the whole phrase is a little long, so I shortened that down to I'm a jerk and everybody loves me. However, I would like to tie this text a little bit more into our central logo, and I think we could do that by breaking this line up into two parts and putting one above the anchor and one below it. And to make sure we're still keeping most of our attention on this central logo, we could even make this text follow the contour of the logo. As for the font, we want something fairly bold, that way it matches the logo, but we also don't want it super wide, that way we keep the text mainly contained in the center. Since this is a product for sea creatures, I'd like the background to be something that makes it feel like you're underwater. So maybe we'll just start off with a solid blue. And since we have this almost circle shape made from our logo and our text, I think we can maybe make a series of circles starting from the center and then fading out. I really like the colors we have now and the fact that this circle pattern really draws you in, but I do think it looks a little bit off because our text isn't perfectly circular to match the rings in the background. Maybe we can make some shapes that are a little more organic and that fit around this central logo part a bit better. And this new shape feels a lot more organic, almost like flowing water. So maybe for these other circles, we can do some similar shapes and try to make the whole thing feel like layers of waves. And if there's one thing that waves make, it's bubbles. So I think we could add some bubbles to this just to help bridge some of these layers and to give the whole thing a bit more movement. And I mainly kept those concentrated at the top because I want to give the illusion that these bubbles are flowing upward. And to help give these layers a little more depth, I'm going to paint some shadow behind each one. I'll make that text lighter so it's easier to read, and so it feels a little more separate from the logo. And just like I said when we started this, it's a really good idea to have some type of information on here that talks about what features the product has. And the 3 bits of info I think we need on here are that you just have to add air, there's different strength levels to choose from, and there's also that hairy mode. If we only had 2 of these things, we could probably put one on each side of the logo. But since we don't, I feel like the only way that we're gonna be able to fit these on here is to stack them vertically, kind of like they are. And right now we just don't have the room for that. So I think what we're gonna have to do is move our logo over to the left and then have an empty section over here where we can list all of these features. I'll make these the same font as our tagline, that way we have some consistency, but I will make them smaller so we keep a good sense of hierarchy. I definitely like to put something visual here to represent each of these points so they're not just text. So maybe we can spread these out and then put an icon above each of them. And to help match some of these other bubbles, I think we should put our icons inside of a circle. And to help mirror the tagline text that warps around the logo, maybe we could also bend the text over here around each of their circles. And now, let's make some icons. And for our first icon, I'm gonna make a puff of air. And for the outline, I'm gonna use the same dark blue that we used in our anchor. And once I've got the shape, I'll go back in and vary the line thickness to give it a little more interest. So in the show, there's actually a part where you can see a gauge on the side of the arms that shows you what strength level they're set to. And for this one, I'll do some type of gauge icon. And what else can you do for the hairy mode except add a hairy arm? I think I'll actually color these icons in just to help them stand out more. And we can actually make the sides of our box a different color than the front. So to help frame this cover, I'm gonna make the sides darker. And guys, I think that's got it for our package. I think we pulled off a pretty simplistic design that still has a lot of character, but that also delivers the information that you would want to have on a product like this. And you know, I bet we could take this one step further and make a full-on pop-up display just like you'd see in the store. Something that's pretty large and that grabs people's attention and presents the product in a really appealing way. So let's make something like that. I'm gonna start with a rough shape for this, and the way I imagine this working is we'll have some type of setup to where we have a flat background that can stand up on its own in the store, and there'll be a shelf attached to that. And on the shelf we'll put the product, and then we'll have the rest of the area to put graphics promoting the product or the brand. So I'm just gonna drop our logo in here, and we'll probably want that towards the top. And actually, what I think would be really cool is instead of printing our logo directly on this backdrop, maybe we can make it a separate piece that's larger than the backdrop, and that's attached to it with some type of support structure. That way our logo is actually raised off of the background. And to make this feel a little more organic, I think I'm gonna round the top of our backboard. And now let's go ahead and place that shelf in. I found this really cool image of a wooden shelf, and I'm just gonna remove the background from that so we can use this. And I think it would be cool if the shelf was a little wider than the backdrop, because the more depth we can give this presentation and the less flat it feels, the more visual interest it's gonna have, and the higher the chance it is that somebody's gonna actually come and look at it. Now obviously we don't want our rope covering our logo, so we can get rid of that part. And I think we could just make 2 holes in our backdrop that the rope feeds through, and that's how it'll stay connected to the entire display. And now we can go ahead and drag in our packaging we just designed and put that in place. And I imagine we could have multiple packages on this shelf stacked in front of each other. If we take a look at an actual supermarket in SpongeBob, we can see that all of these shelves are trimmed with bamboo. And I think we could use that idea here. So I've got this image of different bamboo pieces sitting next to each other, and I'm just gonna cut one of these out and place over top of the shelf. And also in the show, the actual shelf part is a little bit darker, so I'm gonna darken up our wood here. For the backdrop, we obviously don't want it to be a plain white, and so we wanna pick a color that really makes everything else pop out. And I think yellow is that perfect color, because it's really gonna stand out in the store, and it's actually the complementary color to blue, which is used a lot in our packaging and the logo. And to add a little more interest to our backdrop, I think it would be cool to repeat the pattern we had on our packaging, but just in a larger format. And then we'll do a little color adjustment. So I'm gonna use some of the same brushes we used to paint our logo and add some texture to the background. Now why don't we go ahead and add a background to the scene? I think something like this blue wood could work really well. Now we do have that "I'm a jerk and everybody loves me" text on the box, and because that's so iconic, I think we ought to try to repeat that somewhere in this presentation. And what I think would be really cool is to put this text in some type of dialogue bubble, almost so it looks like our anchor logo is kind of a person and it's actually saying things. Something like this, and then we could just put the text inside those bubbles. And since both of these items are gonna be off of the backboard just like our logo, to help them match the logo, I'm gonna give these an outline as well. Both of these stand out a little too much right now, so I'm gonna dial those back by making them a different color. And obviously these message bubbles can't just be floating in the air, but we could pull off something like this in the real world by hanging them from the ceiling with some really thin transparent wire. And now that we pretty much have our display set up, I think it's time to start adding some realism to this scene. And the first thing I want to do is make our logo look like it's some type of cardboard. That way it actually has some depth and texture to it. And we can do that by actually borrowing the texture from our box mockup we used before. And now we can use this image to give anything we want a cardboard texture. And looking at the before, you can see that some of this is very flat, but after we add the texture, you can see that grit running throughout the entire thing. Now to really make this look 3D, we can add a bevel and emboss layer style. And that added some nice lighting around the edges of our logo to make it look like it was 3D. I'll just do that same process to the backboard and our dialogue bubbles. And now I'm gonna go ahead and paint in shadows for each of our objects. And of course, our entire display is going to cast a big shadow on our background wall. I think our background is a little clean right now, so I'm going to add some grunge to that. We'll turn that grunge black and white, and then we can adjust the blend mode and get a look that we like. The light in our scene is coming from the top left, and so we need to add some lighting to each of our objects that reflects that. And to wrap this whole scene up, I think we should throw in a few props. For example, something like this plant. It'll bring some life to the scene and also introduce another color that we haven't really used much of. And I think I'll actually move that plant behind the display, that way it doesn't take away so much of our attention. I will add another one over here in the corner to help balance that out. And to help balance out the props we added at the bottom, I think we need something up at the top too. So maybe we could do something as simple as hanging a few ropes from the wall. And of course we can change those colors so they blend in a little bit more with the background, and we'll give them a shadow. And I'm just gonna do a few little touch-ups and some color grading. So guys, here's our final result. I had a lot of fun with this one, and it was really awesome to bring this iconic brand to life. I think we've got something here that's really fun and kind of quirky. It's kind of got that in-your-face attitude that we see throughout the show, and honestly, I can't wait to do the next one. If you've got something from a movie or a TV show or even a video game that you'd like to see me do a design for, then leave me a comment and let me know what that is. If you're not subscribed already, then go ahead and do that, and make sure to ring that bell. That way you actually get a notification when I post a video. If you did like this video, make sure to press the like button, because that helps me see that you guys want more of this type of content. And don't forget, if you know somebody that you think would enjoy this video, share it with them, because the more people that see this video, the more of this type of stuff I'm gonna make. You can watch some of my other stuff here, and once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.